out to my patrons for voting on this video concept this week. We're gonna have a follow-up video on motivation specifically only for my patrons. It'll be out before the end of August. And I wanted to shout out this month's art challenge winners. I was super excited about all of the submissions I got, and I can't wait for September's competition as well. So yeah, woo! Now on to the video. Today, we are talking about finding your art style. To do this, I'm going to share my art story, and we're going to talk about some pretty personal parts of that journey, as well as share my 3 art tips for art style discovery. Pew! I've always loved art. As an artist herself, my mom really encouraged me to be creative, and that worked because I was naturally very inclined towards art. In elementary school, my art even got selected to be on the 6th grade graduating classes t-shirts, and I was pretty dang proud. Fast forward to high school, art was becoming part of how I identified myself. I would put my all into my assignments, but outside of assigned projects, I kind of just doodled around and had a hard time coming up with ideas of my own. In 11th grade, I took AP Art, which was an advanced placement class whose credits can transfer into college credits if you do well enough on your final exam. During AP class, we had to complete a portfolio of 2 sections. I believe they were called the breadth and the concentration. The breadth was composed of technical assignments, still lives, life drawing, basically things to showcase your technical abilities. The concentration was where you were meant to get creative, use your skills, and come up with a personal concept, showcase a style. Now, thanks to my teacher who saw real potential in my technical skills and validated the crap out of me, I'd spent a lot of time practicing, and my technical abilities were pretty good. Where I lacked original ideas, I could not come up with a concept for my concentration. I attempted a few different ideas, but eventually I ended up making my concept something like objects of antiquity, and essentially all that meant was I did a ton more still lives. This concept was something I had no personal interest in, but it didn't take much effort in terms of really considering what I wanted to make, so that's what I went for. I think because of my lack of personal voice, I ended up with a 4 out of 5 on the portfolio rather than full marks, but I was still happy. After this stage of my art journey, I started applying to colleges and art programs. A lot of you already know I went to BYU, which is not an art school, but still had a great program in my opinion. At the time, I assumed a studio art degree would be the best fit for my artistic goals, so that's what I went into. I'm super glad now that I did, but for a while there, I thought I should have gone into illustration, which spends much more effort into technical training than my studio program did. What studio did do for me was something unexpected that I really needed in order to push my personal direction and art forward, teach me to have a personal voice in art. Here's where my story starts to run into how I found my art style. BYU's art program is structured like this. You take a ton of different introductory classes into different art fields. You can learn sculpture, ceramics, welding, drawing, watercolor, oil painting, 2D design, 3D design, printmaking, bookbinding, figure drawing, etc. Here was my first clue to find my style. I was given the chance to try all the things. And this is my first tip with finding your style. Number 1, make a shiz ton of art. I know not everyone has the ability to try a ton of different mediums, but that's not even completely necessary. What I would say is necessary is this idea. The only way you're going to start to grasp a concept of what you're drawn to and enjoy in art is to make a ton of stuff and a ton of different stuff. Experimenting is so important, and as I've been emphasizing on my channel lately, I hope that during this experimental period you will really give yourself free rein to make mistakes and make things you don't like. You have to start somewhere, and if you don't allow yourself to try new things, you'll likely miss opportunities for self-discovery. Take this opportunity to praise your committed time and effort as a metric for your successes, rather than focusing on your amazing art being your only measurement for success. In fact, if it helps, maybe even make a goal to make a certain number of bad art pieces each week, just so you can ensure that you're not afraid to fail, and so you can start seeing your failures as successes necessary for your growth. So, as I took all these classes, I definitely began to feel drawn towards painting. Drawing was honestly pretty boring for me. Sculpture was awesome, but also intimidated the crap out of me. Ceramics could have been cool too, but honestly, I think what it really came down to was I was already really familiar with and really into 2D art by then, and I just wanted to keep going with it. All throughout my bachelor's, we were exposed to different artists in guest lectures, presentations, assignments, and that is paramount to the next part of this story. I was in a painting class. I can't even remember the assignment, but for it, I made a couple unconventional portraits. Mostly realistic, but with some experimentation on color and repetition. Here comes the part where, again, I got great validation from a teacher and clung onto it with all my life. Apparently, outside approval has been a big part of my art journey as well, if I'm just being honest. My teacher loved a self-portrait I brought in and showed me an artist who did work similar to its style, Jenny Morgan. Here's where things clicked for me and where I'll insert my tip number 2. Find other artists who inspire you and study their work. Every time I've gone through a style shift, which has happened 3 times now, it began with me latching onto at least one artist who inspired me. Jenny Morgan was the first artist in this succession. I became obsessed with the goal of being just like her, just as talented, skilled at hyperrealism, just as in tune with contemporary art practice, and injecting a personal aesthetic into this long-standing tradition of portraiture. I loved her precision, the smoothness, the bright colors, the vulnerable expressions of her figures, the honesty in their depiction. Jenny Morgan's awesome. I took my own references, I painted my own portraits, I tried out different variations on how to experiment with the figure and maintain hyperrealism. Essentially, I wanted to be like her, but I did make my own stuff, and I started getting pretty decent at portraits. They were very recognizably mine when you would see them, and people knew me around the program for my colorful, abstract, hyperrealistic faces. I stuck with that for a couple years, and that was my first style. Something to know, it's okay for your style to change. It doesn't mean you never had one or you're lost. Picasso went through a ton of evolutions and periods with his work. Of course, some people like some of his movements more than others, but that really can't define your choices as an artist. At least for me, I went into art because I loved it. So I feel like it's important to continually make art that I love. I faced my first style shift in 2013 when my dad died. I'm sorry if you've heard this story a million times, but oh well, whatever. When my dad died, it was really unexpected. If you don't want to hear how he died, just hum over me for 1 second. Somehow a hole developed in an artery in his neck while he was sleeping, and blood spilled out of it, filling his lungs and stomach. So he drowned in his sleep. After he died, I stopped wanting to paint portraits. If you watch my art progress video, which I'll link in the description, you can really see this shift in my art. For the time, portraits just didn't interest me the same way they had. I couldn't think about much else beyond my dad, so painting faces just felt kind of empty. And this was scary because after he died, I went back to school and only had 3 months to prepare for my senior show, my first solo show ever. I'd been planning on using a ton of my portraits that I'd made over the years, but now I felt like I needed to make something different and completely redo the show. But what was I gonna make? You know how I said earlier we had a lot of exposure to different artists at my school and some would come to guest lecture us? Well, one day the painter Royal Nebuchadnezzar came to town. Whenever we had guest lecturers come to school, we could sign up to have them critique our work. The normal student who would guide guest artists around the studios, take them to their critique appointments, wasn't available, so that day I took over the job. Either at some point during our time together or during his lecture, he said something to the effect of, paint whatever is most pressing on your mind. Which takes us to my tip number 3. Ask yourself this: what do I think about when my mind wanders? So when you're watching one of my videos or listening to a friend tell a story, sitting in your car, driving to work, falling asleep at night, or brushing your teeth, what are the thoughts that always creep up at the back of your mind? The things that really matter to you and press on your conscience. If you don't know the answer already, start trying to pay attention to those thoughts. Write them down. See if you have ones that come up more than once, or all the time. You are lucky because you're an artist, and you have material creeping at the back of your mind all the time to make art about, so use it. That said though, this doesn't mean your thoughts have to translate into literal images. Let me explain how this worked for me when I had to prepare for my senior show. When I started asking myself this question of what do I think about when my mind wanders, there was obviously a huge thing hanging in my mind: my dad. I was married 9 days before my dad died, and when he passed, I was immediately horrified by what that meant for my life. I was 21, newlywed, fatherless. I felt like the idea of home had shattered completely. I felt like my dad was gone, and now there was this new man in my life, my husband. I was terrified by the prospect of needing to be self-reliant, establish my own new home and life. I felt very displaced, and so I started painting the ocean. I thought a lot about the themes of death, home, loss, lostness. And from this, I decided to metaphorically translate my consuming thoughts about my dad and death into images of the water. Deep and threatening, mysterious and dark, powerful, calm, healing. I saw each of these as common descriptors of both death and water. The other reason water became my favorite imagery was because all my favorite and most powerful visual memories with my dad take place in nature. We lived on the water. He loved boats, his garden, the sunset, the harbor. That was him, and that was home. So I painted it. This was all 4 years ago, and since then I've focused on imagery that helps me reflect on the idea of home and a sense of place, painting all landscapes, seascapes, skyscapes. But now, as those of you who have seen my most recent videos and follow me on Instagram have seen, I'm going through another shift in my art and in my life. I separately knew my life has been going through a lot of changes recently, and also that I've felt the need to explore my art style and interests more. But only recently did I put together that these two things are related. This year I had a major change in my belief system. I went from being a very religious person to going down a road of personal self-discovery and shedding a lot of the labels I used to put on my identity. I've personally had a huge range of new experiences and ways of thinking that I didn't even know existed before. It's been a totally mixed bag, but an experience I really cherish. And now I realize I need to allow myself the freedom to explore all the changes I'm feeling internally, externally through my work. Some days I feel like making totally weird, random stuff, some of which I love, some of which I don't love, and some days I just feel like painting the water still. I realize this video is meant to be about finding your style, and it kind of ends on a note in my personal journey where I'm not settled into a distinct style. But I hope that by hearing my story and some of these tips, maybe you can just pull what helps you and apply it in the best ways for you. Just to finally recap on those 3 tips we talked about one last time. Number 1, make a shiz ton of art. Number 2, find artists who inspire you and study their work. And lastly, number 3, ask yourself, what do I think about when my mind wanders? And then make art about it. If you guys have any thoughts on all this, let me know them in the comments. I'd love to hear more about your personal journeys and experiences with finding your art. That's what I'm doing right now, so yay for shared experience, right? Voiceover out. Pew! I really actually feel a lot of love and support from this community, so I really appreciate you guys forever. If you feel like anyone could benefit from these tips, or if you just want to help support me, you can leave a like on this video. Make sure you're subscribed, and if you want notifications about when my videos come out, hit the bell. I'll see you guys next Friday. Goodbye.